I'm Dan.
And I'm Alex, and welcome back to On Air. Happy Wednesday to you guys. Pleased to have you here, wherever you listen, wherever you get your podcasts. How are you, Dan?
I'm good. It's been a blessed week because we finally got to hang out in person again, which was so overdue. It's been a very boring summer without, some good laughing and gossip sessions. So I'm happy we got that time this week.
I was completely taken aback to realize that actually the last time we were able to hang out in person was, did you say it was in March?
Yeah.
Which is wild. I think that just goes to show, because we obviously gather for the podcast week in, week out, it doesn't feel like I miss out on catching up. When you came in, I thought anyway, it only felt like a few months, but as you said, it was fun to have you here. It was cool. We had less than even 18 hours, didn't we? But we did a lot. We managed to be really productive and do a lot in the time that you were here before you boarded your flight, your little single aisle onwards as you continue on your travels. And you were fresh from BA first, which, that was plenty of tea for you to arrive at midnight and then have a million things to tell me about the flight, as if it was ever going to be, hey, yeah, it was fine. How's it going? You were like, oh my God, they didn't load on the nuts.
The olives.
The olives, that's it.
It is funny. I just saw a photo of George Russell in BA first. Like, he was flying it last night.
Yes, me too.
Sitting in the same seat I sat in. And I was like, let me check that registration real quick, because maybe it's the same exact plane I flew. It wasn't, unfortunately, but I did fly it 48 hours before him. So
you commented on George Russell's Instagram that you hit that first about the seat, right? Because this is something I've seen you do. There is a certain, especially when, and the frequent flyer community who are listening to this will be able to, this will resonate, but there is a sense of ownership, isn't there, when you know the exact reg and the seats, then you think, yeah, that's mine. Now imagine people feel like that on commercial flights. Imagine how we feel on a delivery, like the delivery before it even goes into service. I'm like,
rub it in.
That was quite special. When you saw George Russell's Instagram flying on BA first to Singapore.
Yeah.
Okay. I wonder if anyone else comes to... My first thought was, why would you, of all the choice to Singapore, not least Singapore Airlines, and then every other airline in between that you can stop over to reach Singapore. There are, there's so many. It's just the best route in terms of choice. And obviously he has the creme de la creme of choice, because they're able to fly first in business all around the world as Formula One drivers. And why would you choose BA?
Well, he could have chosen Qantas or SQ, both of which would have been better choices. But what I learned when I was at the Grand Prix in Jeddah earlier this year is that since so many F1 teams are British, they all have a very strong allegiance to British Airways. And it goes far that to many of these places like Jeddah, British Airways actually upgrades the aircraft types throughout the F1, because there's so many staffers who are completely loyal to BA. So I'm sure there's, all types of dynamics at play that make the drivers, everyone working on the team, always go with BA. But what a sweet deal for them. Like, this must be one of their biggest corporate clients, and they are just milking that cow as much as they can.
And don't forget, in terms of BA's corporate clients, they have Formula One themselves and FIAs, meaning that, BA are very often involved in moving the race from one city to another. And they operate the wet lease, they operate the charter flights that are specifically carrying F1 personnel and F1 equipment from one race to the other. We saw this with Vegas. You see it all the time. You catch their A350s or their 777s doing routes that are not scheduled routes. And in addition to that, of course, their corporate clients stretch well beyond Formula One as an entity to each individual team. And it's not all the teams, but it is many of the teams that they also have those commercial agreements with. So it's definitely a moneymaker. I remember one time when United had revealed that Apple, I think at one point in time, maybe perhaps still were their biggest corporate customer
Yeah. From
to
San Francisco to
California.
China.
Exactly. Yeah. And that was, it's just interesting when you realize actually aviation is so much more, as we often talk about, than just getting a person from A to B. It's literally what helps the world go round.
Yeah. And why is it always the worst airlines that get the best corporate clients? Like, are there no air? And also, those corporate clients, can't they use that influence to improve the airline and make the experience better for their staff? Instead, it's like, no, just stick to what we're used to. If I had the influence of being the one who decides which airline, F1 goes with or Apple
Yeah.
employees goes with, I would wield that to my benefit as much as I could to be like, you know what, we need to start upgrading this and this and this, or we're flying Virgin, or we do,
Yeah,
that's
it's true. But most of them, as you say, most of them are thinking, or rather are not thinking about the declines to the onboard service or the fact that the meals are shrinking or that the service perhaps is being cut in various elements of the service. And they're just thinking about bottom line pricing, of course. And I'm sure that in their commercial agreements, it's able to be not only commercially appropriate for both sides, but also it's the fact that, as you said, so many teams and so much of the personnel are based in the UK. Naturally, BA has that long haul non-stop advantage there, doesn't it? So
yeah.
it's probably convenience first, along with price, over the fact that they might be operating this 27-year-old 777-200 with an old dated cabin and blah blah blah, and Wi-Fi that doesn't work, and they can't keep their staff or the drivers connected, and it's like, well, they don't really care.
Yeah.
It's not part of the deal.
This sort of brings us nicely into something very, very cool and fun that I and a few other people were invited to do yesterday. That was just such a dream come true. I got to, not fully, not on a plane, but I got to basically try being a first class crew member at Emirates for the day. So
When?
yesterday. So
You didn't tell me this, and I saw you the day before.
So I didn't really know what it was going to be actually, but I ended up
Right.
getting to do a whole tray service, and they had their top, like the people who decide the whole service flow there. So I got to lay the trays, I got to plate dishes, all this like super cool stuff. But what I realized that is, I mean, when you work in the industry, of course you know this, but the level of attention to detail on the world's best airlines compared to more mediocre airlines is insane. Like the number of things I messed up when I thought I was really paying attention and
That's
focusing
interesting.
I was like, oh my gosh, this really takes practice. And I learned that for economy class, an Emirates crew member will go through 2 weeks of service training alone. That's besides safety training, just service. Then to upgrade to business, it's another full 2 weeks. And for first class, another 2 weeks. So 6 weeks of dedicated service training to be able to work in first class. When I know for a fact that at a lot of airlines in Europe or North America, it's a couple of days of training in customer service, which is just wild. So I was telling one of the head people who's in charge of this about my experience in BA first and some of the stuff I'll be sharing in my review eventually. And she was like, that really pisses me off because there's so many airlines that just don't appreciate the fact that people in premium cabins, especially, not everyone is just there like George Russell because they can afford to fly first every time or their company is
because
paying
their
for
company's
it.
paying. Exactly, yeah.
For a lot of people, especially on an airline like Emirates that has so many first class seats, many of the passengers are doing it, one, as a splurge, two, as a once in a lifetime thing, or three, as, something they have saved up for ages to be able to do.
Yeah.
So then for the crew to just be like, can't really be bothered today to, do the best possible job, or we can downgrade the catering because it's a route where it's not so important. That is crazy, right? That a lot of
Yeah.
airlines do that.
Yeah, no, and we always say this, don't we? That when we're discussing how, you know, either you or myself have been in, for example, a first class cabin and the service has been rubbish and it's just been really, and then you remember the cost of it. And again, it always, I think, should go back to that point that the crew have no, or rather the airline, rather than blaming the crew, but the airline have no idea whether or not that is, as you said, the trip of a lifetime for those, for the couple that are sitting there for 6 hours that could have been saving for years for something like that. And, you catch them on an off day, or you catch them on a route where they think it doesn't require as much in terms of what we have to provide. You're robbing those people of something that they've paid a lot to experience if you just go with the mentality that everyone in those cabins is just there because their big corporate companies are paying. Of course, that is true in for so many routes and for so much of the cabin, but it definitely isn't true, as you said, for Emirates, which is a very kind of an airline successful in their aspirational marketing at having people want to be able to fly in their premium cabins, and also an airline that is flying to many popular premium holiday destinations like Bali, like Thailand, Maldives, and so on. So that's really interesting. How long were you doing it for? And I'm assuming there is video evidence of this that we're going to eventually see.
Yeah, there is video evidence. So
Okay,
it was
good.
about 5 hours. The whole time wasn't spent just me actively doing it, but
Yeah.
I think we spent a
5 hours of you walking up and down the aisle. I think that's a video we'd all watch.
Yeah, not quite. But like, for example, when it came to dessert, they literally were like, okay, we're going to simulate. So after everything we've learned that day, so for example, the plate, there's a logo underneath the plate that if the client lifts the plate up to check the brand, the logo needs to be upside down from the perspective of the crew so that it's exactly aligned straight facing the customer if they happen to flip the plate to check the brand. And then there's things like, the chocolate on a dessert, if the dessert is hot, so they had like a hot date cake, one of the desserts we were making,
Yes.
then the
Yeah.
chocolate will melt in a few seconds. So you have to literally place it, the last thing you do, and then run to the seat to make sure that it's delivered in one piece. So there's so
Yeah.
many things that go into it. So after everything we'd learned, they set a timer, a 2-minute timer, and they went start. And then we had the dessert exactly like it's presented to the crew on the aircraft on the cart. So we had to put on gloves, disassemble everything in the box, and then plate it
That's
according
fun.
to the instructions that the crew get as the timer was ticking. And they were going, 1 minute, no, I see that's incorrect. Oscar, redo that, or that kind of thing. It was,
This is like Bake Off or Ready
yes.
Steady Cook for those that remember this, like in the early 2000s. But an airline edition. I am wholeheartedly offended that I was with you the day before and knew nothing of it because I would have flown with you. So did you prepare all? I mean, what was the most difficult thing or the most surprising element to all of this?
Well, the most surprising thing was actually just laying the table because the
Mm,
like obviously I've never worked in a restaurant. I don't know the level of detail that goes into, like, for example, the knife is
mm,
supposed to align perfectly with the handle of the champagne glass when you place that down. They're supposed to be in a straight line. And
right.
then you have the water glass always to the right of that, and
Yeah.
all these little rules that, I've obviously noticed, but I haven't thought about how much detail goes into it. And then, of course, on these airlines, there's the body language. So you always want to serve it with your body open toward the customer, never using the shoulder that's toward them. Then we also learned the whole history of why, for example, at restaurants, a server will almost always serve you from the left. Because historically, in medieval times, people would have their sword on the right side of their body. So
Oh,
if
that's good.
so they only wanted to have their left hand occupied with food so that their right hand was always available for the sword. And
So
then, yeah,
that's why we're served from left to right.
yes, exactly. That's one thing. And then what is the history of cheers? Why did you used to, clink glasses together, because the idea back then was that you would bump them so hard that some of your drink would spill into the other person's glass and vice versa, so that if the drink was poisoned, that would be a way of, evening that out to minimize the risk, or so that the other person would reveal that it was poisoned. So just the fascinating history of why we do things that we don't that we don't consciously think about. It was just, I wish you were there.
That's
Seriously.
really cool. That's really, I could listen to this kind of stuff. So you've obviously noticed as a passenger, for example, I'm imagining, right, when you're sitting in, let's say, Qatar business, and you know what's coming next, don't you, in your head, because you've flown it
Hmm.
so much. So you know that from, once the tablecloth has gone down, then you know from left to right, it's the tray with the salt and pepper and the butter where the olive
Yeah.
oil will go, followed by the what's in the now I'm thinking, what's in the top left of the table? What's the first thing on the
Well, the
top
bread
left?
basket is usually the top
Oh,
left,
that's it.
no?
Bread basket. That's it. Sorry. So bread basket, then candle, then glass that will be typically the still or sparkling water glass. Then the fork, plate, knife aligned. Then handing the passenger, and there's that kind of gentle interaction where they want to put the serviette napkin on, like they want to just gently prop that on you rather than just hand it to you for you to do. And of course
Yeah.
they still have the serviette napkin still has that little cut, tiny slit in the corner. Have you noticed that?
Yeah.
You know what that's for?
They didn't tell us that yesterday.
So you know what I'm talking about, right? So
Yeah.
in the
In one
square
of the
napkin,
corners.
in one of the corners there is that tiny slit cut out. It's just a tiny line. So that is to put over a shirt button.
No way. Okay, that's cool.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's so if it's very rare that I would be flying in a shirt anymore. I think we've spoken extensively about how we value traveling in
Comfort.
athleisure rather than and then just changing on arrival. But if I would find myself then wearing a shirt, that's great, because then it's really stable. You can put it nice and high so that it covers your whole white shirt and you're not going to have any
Hmm.
stains or splashes. So that's those tiny things, and that's not a recent thing. This dates back forever. Is it to everything you just said? So
Yeah.
all of these things still exist in the service element on board aircraft today.
Exactly. And what you would have loved, that I think, I'm sure all airlines emphasize this, but just seeing the emphasis on hygiene. So, like, of course, you only ever touch the base of the base, right, of the
Yeah,
customer's forks and knives, of the glass, things like that. Everything is supposed to be very, you don't touch the part of plates where the food goes, obviously. Um, it's just an art. Like, it really makes you appreciate how far some airlines go. And now that made me think I want to go see Singapore Airlines first class crew training,
yes,
because that's like boot camp. I
yeah.
mean, all of these trainings are like boot camp, but yeah, I would love to see if they take it a step further, or if it's, basically what I did yesterday, which would be really cool.
The interesting. So the way that you said that, obviously there's still 2 weeks for economy, and so maybe passengers will think, well, hold on, how could there be just amount of time as remembering all of that in the premium cabins to economy, where most people associate it as, they're just putting down a tray. But there is even more to that, and I'm sure that's something that you had seen as well, in terms of how they prepare it so that it's visually pleasing and looks
Hmm.
appetizing, at least for the passenger. But also, did you find out about how they prefer the trays to be handed back to them when you have consumed the meal in economy?
No, we didn't talk about economy much, but you tell
Okay,
me if
so
you know.
so and I believe this to be true, and just in case any crew listening have any insight on this, but a crew member once told me over a decade ago that they really like it when passengers about to hand their tray back make everything as flat and as low as
Mm.
possible on the tray. So no carton standing up, no element of height on the tray. If everything is nicely packaged as flat and as low as possible, it's 10 times easier for them as they then start to put it into the cart, then take it out of the cart later where it needs to go into the other one, and so on. So that's a quick way to help out your crew members once you've finished your in-flight dining.
Yeah, that is interesting. Did you read the news about KLM, how they've decided in a few years they're going to, quote, optimize the space on their aircraft? So they're adding more seats, yet somehow going to make it more personalized. I don't really buy into that part, but basically they're going to shrink a lot of the galleys through new technologies that allow them to do things more efficiently. So I'm curious because it is kind of crazy how inefficient some of the systems we still use are with catering, and especially, a lot of this stuff
much of aviation
can be
so much of air
densified.
travel.
And I mean, the crazy thing is how much weight food and drink contributes to a flight. We learned that on an Emirates A380, on their average flight length, so not even the longest ones, food and drink alone weigh 8.5 tons. How crazy is that?
Yeah. And of course, these are airlines that are making sure that they have enough and that they're not running out, and that it's multiple cabin classes. So all of this stuff is multiple meal services, then the on-demand element, then the crew meals, the meals for the pilots, the flight deck crew. There's a lot. And that's why, no wonder they said, right, if something has to go, it's the onboard literature in terms of to reduce weight.
Yeah, for sure. You can't really reduce food. That would be difficult.
No, some airlines are though, and let's quickly visit that subject, because British Airways have said that responding to a trial, it's always responding to a trial or responding to passenger feedback. Apparently, they've spoken to passengers who have said that they don't want a hot meal anymore in Club Europe on short flights,
Right.
and apparently, in response to that passenger feedback, find me a passenger who said that. I don't know where they exist, but apparently they do. It seems that BA will be scrapping hot meals in European business class, known as Club Europe. Here we go again. This is something that is like a never-ending cycle with BA on certain routes that are the shorter band routes. So obviously it's domestic UK. It's also Paris, Amsterdam. It is a bit unclear as to whether or not this has fully been decided right now, but it does seem that it is happening. To what extent and whether or not, I mean, if you think about how they block time Paris, for example, where the true flight time from Heathrow to Paris is about 35 minutes. Sometimes it's even less than that. Some other times maximum it's about 45 minutes. But the block time is actually not that. They give themselves a good hour and 15 or an hour and a half to get there. Now that matches the same block time as flights that are, of course, a little further away from Heathrow. So the likes of Geneva, which you just flew now, didn't you, on BA from Geneva to Heathrow and so on. So I'll be interested to find out exactly where this is going into place. But someone had said to me that the reason why BA are confident to say that it's in response to passenger feedback is because apparently there is a clever way that airlines can manipulate such feedback in inverted commas, which is that Dan, I'm serving you or rather actually, since you did the training, you're serving me a hot meal on BA Club Europe on a Paris flight, let's say, in breakfast, okay? And you serve it to me, and then later, when we discuss the meal, I tell you that it was terrible, that I didn't have enough time to eat it, that you were asking for the tray back after 7 minutes of it having been on my tray table, that it all felt rather rushed, that it was too hot to consume, and blah, blah, blah. It seems that can be kind of twisted into in response to passenger feedback who felt that they, didn't have they had a negative experience with the hot meal. We're scrapping the hot meals to better provide for. So somebody explained to me that could be a play. I'm not saying definitely that it is, but it is a way in which airlines are able to manipulate the kind of feedback that they gather. And of course, we know that BA, when they made this massive announcement about the coal to their frequent flyer program, where they are literally going to be wiping out thousands and thousands of frequent flyers, they've upped the threshold for gold to over £20,000 worth of spend on only British Airways, which people were not doing to get gold previously, they said that was in response to passenger feedback. What was the passenger feedback? That the lounges were too full. Now, when people were making those complaints, they were not saying, so can you make it extremely difficult for us to retain gold? They were saying, can you do what other airlines do and perhaps expand your lounges, or, just, reinvest some of those profits? So they have a bit of a history of being a bit tricky with said feedback.
And by the way, I told you this, the Concorde room, their most exclusive lounge, only for first class passengers, even that was crowded, and you don't even get in there with status. So, there's problems on multiple levels here. But one thing I find so sad about this is that, especially, fine on some shorter European routes, but domestically in the UK, the hot English breakfast is such an iconic part of flying BA. It's been around for so long, and the fact that
used to be everyone in economy would get the same.
Yes, that's why. Because I was like, I had that once when I was like a teenager, but surely I wasn't in Club Europe. And now I remember it was a hot meal in economy, which is crazy. So it's just, this is what these airlines don't understand. They're stripping away all the things that make them special and make them loved, and leaving just a shell that's a brand that used to be great. But now, what reason do people have to care about it?
Yeah, it's true. I'm just while you were talking, I've just gone back to some of the notes that I made before meeting an airline team. Actually, this was an airline that never really got up and running, so I won't go too much into it. But I sat in on a meeting with them about when they were trying to carve out what in-flight dining will look like, and some of the points that were in the PowerPoint that I can see in this date. So this presentation is from July 2014. So some of the key things that they were teaching the senior staff at that time is that at 35,000 feet, your sense of saltiness and sweetness drops by 30%, which is why airline meals taste different than they do on the ground. Tomato juice, or if you're American, tomato juice, is still one of the most popular in-flight drinks because the pressurized cabin makes it more appealing, makes the flavor more appealing.
Still don't understand that, by the way. Do you?
No, I'm not one for a tomato juice. I feel like it's cold soup.
Yes, but, thank you.
Not even in a nice way, because, anyway. An economy class meal can often cost the airline just $3 to produce, while a business or first class meal can exceed $100 per passenger.
Okay, that's the very best. That's not Lufthansa,
I think that's,
BA.
we're talking, well, it could be Lufthansa. They've got caviar in first.
Yeah, that's true. But the rest of the components.
Yeah. Airlines generate about 6 million tons of cabin waste annually, mostly uneaten food. This is back from 2013, I think I said, yeah. I would hope that as an industry, we've got better at that, because there are so many different ways. When I speak to airline CEOs about AI, right, I don't want to hear about how it's helping them write their captions for Instagram, or AI is, everyone loves a chatbot. Guess what? Nobody loves a chatbot. No. Chatbots are awful. I mean, when I have to engage with a chatbot, I just keep typing agent, connect me with an agent, human being. I would like a human. And sorry, I don't understand what you're saying. Well, you told me you were smart, not me. Anyway, so when I talk to airline CEOs about AI, I never like hearing about that. But what I do like hearing about is how there are many airlines right now that are using a common AI software, which apparently has reduced their onboard waste significantly, because AI knows better than the in-house teams as to what would be required for example, London to Delhi in terms of preferences for the in-flight dining. So it's able to better predict the amount of food that will be consumed on board, the correct number of vegetarian meals versus meat, seafood, and so on. And therefore, airlines have been able to significantly reduce their onboard waste by better forecasting and better predicting. And so it is an everyday example of how AI is really taking them places in terms of reducing their waste or their sustainable, footprint and so on. So that's a nice
awesome.
AI example of how it kind of meets a more traditional, very wasteful concept of air travel.
Yeah. What I like about this is that it's quite a perfect transition into our next topic, because we didn't need AI to unfortunately know from the start that Icelandic low cost airline Play was not a very strong concept. And now, unfortunately, the news has come that we knew was going to happen sooner or later, that Play is shutting down and ceasing operations. Do you want to tell
Yeah,
us
so
about that?
this announcement came on the 29th, so just a few days ago, and the airline has abruptly ended all operations, and that was effective immediately. In the statement, Play said that it was down to, quote, heavy losses, weak booking numbers in recent weeks, and they also said there were several disagreements internally over the strategic direction for the airline, that they had faced negative publicity. Play's board and shareholders had been attempting, they said, to turn around the airline via a whole restructuring process and shifting the business model slightly. They proposed a different takeover, still in the kind of privatization side of things. But ultimately, these measures came too late, and the airline has since collapsed. This is something that we used to see more of, and I'm glad, obviously, that for the sake of the livelihoods of the people that work there, at least, that this isn't so common these days, because airlines tend to be doing better. But what I will say, Dan, is that the end of September would always be where
Right.
airlines that were slightly fragile would fall off of a cliff. And that's usually because it is the time where they would have to show either the regulators in their home country or their shareholders or board members and so on that they have ultimately enough cash or cash flow and forward bookings to make it through the winter time, where typically demand is much lower than it is in summer. And therefore, if they were unable to show that they could adequately continue their scheduled operations and be financially sound for the winter time, then the regulator would probably put them in a position where they would have no choice but to collapse. Now, if it didn't involve the regulator, then you can imagine a similar conversation would happen with the shareholders or the board members that wouldn't be satisfied that the airline would be in a financial state to be able to continue. So that's why we've got to the end of September. And I mean, have you flown Play? I haven't, I'll admit.
No, I haven't either.
No. So they did try to replicate this hub via Iceland model, which we did actually discuss if we ran Iceland Air, didn't we, a few episodes ago. But the routes that they were flying underperformed, and the airline obviously faced overcapacity in that segment as a result. They said that there was unexpectedly weak demand, in inverted commas, especially for their longer routes, along with competition, fluctuating exchange rates, fuel costs, and everything that the airline industry is exposed to. This is not really a Play problem. They also said that they had a lot of negative media, which I touched on, which further depressed bookings, because once word gets out about any fragility at an airline, what tends to happen then is that people stay away because they've just seen a quick headline about it being fragile, and understandably they think, do we want to be giving our own cash to support an airline that might go pop? And that's probably something that I mean, Play, anytime they came up on my Instagram, that marketing via Instagram, in my opinion, was gross. That
Yeah.
they would routinely swear and on their reels and like just take the piss out of. And I know Ryanair do it, and I don't know if what I saw was isolated, but I definitely remember 2 or 3 where they were literally either swearing or bleeping out swear words to try to be funny. And I was thinking, oh, this is not how they should be marketing to stop over in Iceland. This is like vulgar.
Yeah. It's I mean, what can we say? It's been a long time coming for this airline. Unfortunately, the it's a continuous examples of low cost long haul, especially transatlantic, just struggling. It's really a
Yeah.
shame because, especially, I remember when I was in college, everyone was flying Norwegian back then, long haul to get home to Europe because they could book one way and it was so cheap. Then when they started cutting routes, then it was okay. At least I can fly WOW, which was the low cost long haul via Reykjavik back then. The Play
Well,
replaced.
play was wow.
Yeah, basically, many of the
Yeah,
same owners. So then people were
exactly.
flying WOW, which was even worse than Norwegian long haul, a truly
Yeah,
rough long haul experience.
yeah,
And yeah, it's just clearly that's why we said when we spoke about if we ran Iceland Air, they need to focus on partnerships and they need to focus on, you know, strengthening. Actually, I don't remember if we said this, but of course, premium, strengthening the premium part of a brand. That's where the money is made these days. So, Iceland
yeah.
Air not having lie flat seats in business and all this kind of stuff, I think for them is quite a weakness.
Yeah, I do too. Just for any listeners that perhaps had bookings with Play. So Play is not offering rebooking. That is pretty standard when an airline collapses in this way. Passengers that are mid-trip will have to buy new flight tickets on another airline. In this scenario, credit card chargebacks and travel insurance claims are really the main avenue for anyone hoping to obtain a refund. But the Icelandic government has ruled out a bailout, saying that Play is a private company and therefore must follow its bankruptcy procedures. The bankruptcy proceeding that is underway now will decide whether any of Play's assets get picked up by any other player, any other investor. But their aircraft were leased, so the aircraft have already flown back to Toulouse, the home of Airbus, to for their leasing companies, to the lessors, to reclaim these jets. And yeah, I mean, there's not much more. I mean, the fact is now is that Iceland Air will now dominate again as the flag carrier, especially on these transatlantic routes, and that low cost competition is few and far
Dwindling.
between now for these routes. Yeah, it will probably mean higher fares, at least for the short term, until other airlines, maybe EasyJet, Wizz, Ryanair, perhaps they will decide that there is room to expand into the Iceland market. But it's, aviation is a complicated game. They say that the fastest way to make millions in aviation is to start with billions and lose it all.
Yeah.
It's, we'll be interested to see. I've seen a lot of the investors, board members, owners, directors of Play very active on LinkedIn saying that there was a future and they're annoyed with the other side of the table or other co-investors, co-board members, and they're already seemingly hinting that there is going to be, stay tuned for what is planned. So we might be talking about WOW becoming Play, and then what's
Something
the next
new.
there? Like what something new?
Oh,
Perhaps
these people
WOW,
just don't.
WOW, Play, and Dismay. Or
Yeah,
WOW.
literally.
Let's
Like,
see.
what are these
We'll keep
people
an eye.
missing? Unfortunately,
Maybe
we had
Global will swoop them up.
yeah, exactly. Why not? Unfortunately, we had another sort of bankruptcy, although they were already bankrupt. The
Mm.
airline that started it all, former Malmö Aviation, now BRA, has announced that they are ending
Oh
all their Airbus
no.
operations since, as you said, summer is over, all the vacation
Yeah.
flights in Europe are
Winter
done.
is coming.
Yeah, winter, literally for a lot of airlines. So
Yeah.
that's
Did
another
they collapse?
unfortunate
Oh, so
miss.
so they're also an end of September victim, aren't they?
Yeah, literally very sad.
And just
Another,
explain why this is sad, because there might be listeners who are unaware as to the link here.
well, how about you explain since
Oh,
you're the
look
one
at
who
you
made
trying
it
to
a
distance
thing?
yourself from the link. So, okay. So, once upon a time in a town called Torp. Is that right? Is it Torp?
No,
Oh, okay.
in
Anyway.
a town called, let's say Gothenburg, or a
Okay, let's
country
say
called
Gothenburg
Sweden.
because we want to protect his privacy. So, once upon a time in a town called Gothenburg, there was a young boy named Dan who was obsessed with aviation, and he was about how old? 7, 8?
I
And
moved to Sweden when I was 9, but okay,
okay,
continue.
9. Okay, he is Swedish. He just moved to Sweden when he was 9. And when you were living there, you were a frequent flyer on what was your favorite airline at the time, which was Malmö Aviation,
What are
right?
you talking about? I had never
What?
flown them in my life.
Uh, I thought this is the airline that you grew up on.
No, I had never flown them in my entire life until after we met the first time. It was just because I happened to fly them for the first time right after we met that you made this whole thing about me being
No, no,
obsessed
no,
with
no, no.
Malmo.
Isn't it because they were based in Gothenburg, right? Or they were based in
No, I mean
no,
they were
no, they were
supposed to be
based in
based in Malmo,
Malmö, right? But
but
much of their
their
operations were from Gothenburg,
their
right?
main base was from Stockholm, so they flew a lot between
Oh,
Gothenburg and Stockholm. That's the main place.
oh God, I had single-handedly convinced myself that you grew up on this airline.
No, not see all these
I
lies
just
you're
thought that
telling
you
yourself.
and Malmo were one. Like I thought it was so because it was so they operated ATRs, right? And they're very kind of
No, they
very
even operated Avros back then. Avro
Avros.
100s.
Goodness. So yeah, but they did also operate ATRs, right? Yes.
Actually, not at the start.
Later in the story.
When we
Later in the
made it a
story. Yeah.
joke, it was a
Yeah.
exclusive little Avro airline.
Little Avro liner, right?
Yeah.
And you yeah, so they were very much kind of like from the when Adele sings Hometown Glory, that song where she's reminiscing when she goes back, right?
Yeah.
That was you arriving for a Malmö aviation flight. So it was very much part of his, those were the aircraft that he'd see when he was flying in and out as a kid and so on. And somehow, anyway, we made the link, and it was a very important airline for him. And I think after I first knew Dan, he was straight away on a Malmö Aviation ATR aircraft, which told me everything I needed to know about Dan back then. and yeah, so anyway, it has been a running joke because then they rebranded as Bra, right? What does
Bra.
Bra
Yeah,
even
which
mean?
I mean that's even worse. Bra in Swedish means good, but what
Yeah,
airline thought that naming their airline an undergarment in English was a
yeah,
good idea if they're going to fly
crazy.
outside Sweden? Even flying inside Sweden, it's a
Yeah,
bizarre idea.
crazy, crazy.
But
So yeah, that's
just
the link. So anyway, they are no more, right?
they are no more, unfortunately, but they are.
Okay,
You might see them around because their ATRs are still operating for SAS and actually for
okay,
Austrian Airlines. So I saw one of their
okay.
ATRs in Frankfurt, but I just need you all right now to go and Google Avro 70
Yeah.
because that little plane, I just sent you a few pictures, Alex. Actually, is that even a thing? Avro 70, I guess? Maybe maybe
Yes.
it was.
Yes.
I never,
Yeah.
that was before our time, but I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
I flew the Avro 85 and 100. This plane
Yeah.
now with some distance looks absolutely crazy,
Can't
doesn't
believe
it?
you boarded it. I mean, we both flew it. Listen, we can't reminisce too much. We'll let the listeners have a look at this aircraft that we used
We
to fly because we need to get to some Q&A.
what? No, wait. We need to just cover one more thing.
Go on.
Wait, two more things. First of all, just speaking of Scandinavia quickly,
Yeah.
SAS introduces intra-European business class today, reintroduces. So that's some perhaps positive Scandinavian news. And then we cannot talk about, reminisce about little Avros without talking about the future and the news that Boeing has started early
Well, I have a
development.
question on this. So I was going to have this as the
Okay.
first question,
Okay,
actually. Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's move into Q&A.
let's move
Okay.
to Q&A.
Okay. So as we just hinted there, we have a few questions in the DMs about Boeing Boeing and the reporting that Boeing are now assessing a new clean sheet design for a replacement of the 737 MAX. So a future Boeing short haul jet, and what this will mean for the industry, what this will mean for passengers, what it would look like or could look like, and so on. This is something that crops up from time to time, but I have been reading, Dan, over the last month specifically, both Airbus and Boeing are ramping up their plans for this because these manufacturers have to plan for the next 2 decades, not simply next few years. And they are both at that point where the 320neo family needs its clean sheet replacement. And with Boeing, I mean, the Boeing 737 MAX is really still a 60-year-old airframe
Yes.
design, just re-engined. It's not anything revolutionary. And so, what were your first thoughts when you saw this? Because many of the listeners are basically asking, what do we think? The likelihood of it? Do we think it's going to be blended wings? Do we think it's going to be aircraft that look like turboprop aircraft without the traditional engine casing and so on. What do you
Well,
think?
this is a real opportunity for Boeing to advance into one of these futuristic type of aircraft that we've seen mock-ups of for so long. And now more than ever, there needs to be a push for sustainability, although that has sort of left the chat in the US. But obviously, worldwide, airlines are always looking to cut fuel costs. And there's only so far you can go with the current shape of aircraft, with the current design of the engines. So I'm really excited to see what comes out of this. It's not many times in our life so far that aircraft designers have announced a clean sheet design for a plane. So this is just such huge news, and I cannot wait to follow where this goes and see if Boeing can finally win not only airlines, but the flying public's confidence back with this.
I think it's the first thought that I had is that it's funny that we're having this discussion when the 737 MAX still hasn't fully had, they're still not out of troubled water with the fact that they're still having to ultimately place limits on how many they can pump out of the factory each month because of the limitations and the more focused safety checks. There are still the quality concerns over the MAX. There are still airlines that are yet to take delivery of them because of all of the trouble there. It's funny that this is still, we're still completely in the territory of teething problems or worse for this newer Boeing variant and this newer Boeing model, the 737 MAX. And yet, understandably so, in aviation, planning for the next 2 decades, as I said, it's time for the conversation on a whole new clean sheet design when they haven't been able to overcome the challenges of this one. And this was a re-engined model. This wasn't really, a drastic structural change by any means at all. So it's an interesting one. And I wonder whether or not Airbus will actually be far better positioned to beat them in this race in replacing the 320neo family, or if Boeing and Airbus will do what they have always done and ultimately race each other and end up within a couple of years of each other in terms of timeline in what they present to the market.
It will be, yeah, I'm so excited. And, hopefully long haul is next, but the A350 and the 777X are, more innovative than what is currently available for the narrow bodies. So we have time for a couple more questions today. First of all, we will look at a question here from Joe, who asks, I wanted to ask your opinions on the best Oneworld, Star Alliance, and SkyTeam loyalty programs to focus on, as I fly very often and I'm mostly based in Asia. So which would you focus on for each? Do you want me to answer this?
I think this is the exact type of question I would send you at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
When I can't sleep, I'm messaging you, Dan, what is the best? Anyway, so please take it away.
All right. So I always tell people that the region you live in does not need to determine what loyalty programs you choose to go for. A lot of the time, it's the opposite. If you live in the US, you can get more benefits, such as lounge access flying domestically if you're elite in a partner program from abroad, rather than one of the US elite programs. So in that sense, I've thought a lot about this as well as Oscar and I look at where to live. I think Alaska Airlines program for Oneworld is very appealing. It's become even more appealing over time. So that's something I'm looking at, especially since you also earn status qualifying miles on award tickets, which is very rare. In SkyTeam, I think Air France KLM Flying Blue is great. We've had Ben Lipsy, the head of that program, on the podcast, which is, one of the reasons we wanted to have him on, because I think they're doing such a great job and it's quite easy to achieve elite status with them as well, but you get the same benefits in Asia. And then for Star Alliance, I'm looking at shifting over to either, this is controversial since we're pitting these two options against each other, but I'm thinking of switching over to either Turkish or Aegean, depending on which one I can get the quickest status with. And then they're both quite easy to maintain. So those are the two I'm looking at in Star Alliance. So what do you think about that?
Well, I think I would take all of your advice because you're the expert. And I think that was money can't buy advice right there because people literally pay you to tell them that. So this is the benefit of subscribing to the podcast. I'm sitting here with my notes and I'm like, Aegean.
Yeah.
As if I'm not already collecting with them.
All right. One more question here. This is from Dan. So he asks, wouldn't it make logical sense to board from the back of the plane forward? This in theory would be more orderly, right? We offload from front to back typically with very smooth results. Why not use that logic in boarding? I mean, a lot of airlines do this.
There are a million ways. Yeah, there are a million ways that have been scientifically proven that are more efficient to board aircrafts, you know, whether it's boarding passengers who have got window seats first, followed by middle, followed by aisle, and in the order of rear to front. There's been literally, and they're considered, you know, scientific studies that's about the flow of passenger movements and how if you were to segment up the cabin and you were to have a jet bridge, as you said, connected to the rear door, so on, there are a million different ways. It just can't be done across the board because each airport is different. You know, the jet bridge breaks down. The airline doesn't want to pay for a jet bridge. You're offering, as you've got angry customers like myself. I'm not an angry customer, but do you remember I had that moan a few days ago about the whole fact that half the plane were kids and they all boarded before the premium cabins and they stood in the aisle despite them all being at the rear. There are so many different ways and it's just proven that no matter what, airlines are continuing to board inefficiently because of a number of different reasons that I understand.
Yeah, well said. All right, on that note, we got to run, but we will catch you all next week for another episode of On Air. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
See you later, guys.